Hi, this is Kevin Trainer, and welcome to my lecture on Chapter 9 of the Kathy Schwalbe uh, textbook, An Introduction to Project Management, 7th edition. And Chapter 9 is about closing projects. As is usual for me, I'm going to leave you to read the learning objectives on your own. Um, okay, let's introduce this topic a bit. So, closing projects or phases involves finalizing all activities and bringing the project or phase to an orderly end. Now, this um, this includes an idea that PMI's had for a long time. If you look at the process groups, okay, which ends with closing. They say, and this is an interesting way to look at it, you can think of these as things that apply in some kind of chronology over the life of the project. But you can also think of these things as apply in some way to each phase of a project. Okay? And so when it comes down to closing, right? Not only do you need to close the overall project, but you really do need to close down any phases that you've had prior to the final phase. Okay, don't leave things open. Okay, so everything has to be signed off is signed off, and everything that has to be paid for is paid for, and uh, if there were contracts for that phase, well, they should be closed off, all those kinds of things, right? So, um, this applies both to a phase of a project, but more appropriately to a project overall. It includes archiving project information, ensuring the planned work is complete, and releasing organizational resources. It often includes a final presentation and a report. It's also important to reflect on what can be learned to improve future projects. It's also important to plan for and execute a smooth transition of the project to the normal operations of the company. So, what comes after the project? And we have a slide a little further along where we talk about the different options for that. And I really like that slide actually. Oh, here it is. I didn't know it was coming so soon. Uh, so, common ways to close or terminate a project. One, so they are integration, addition, extinction, starvation. So, if it's integration, a project is completed and the products and services created are integrated into operations. That's the most common approach. So we just hand over our deliverables. They become part of continuing operations. Addition. A project creates a new product or service that results in a new unit in the organization, such as a department, division, or a company. So I guess it's only handed over to continuing operations at the very highest levels of the organization because the rest of the organization didn't exist before the project. So it's maybe a special case of integration. Extinction. A project ends because it was successful and achieved its goals, or is unsuccessful or superseded. Termination by murder, I think that should be in quotes or at least in italics, is when there is a sudden end to a project. Okay, so some projects stop, and sometimes they stop in successful ways, right? It's just like, um, I think a nice way to think of this is uh, in um, in an agile project, it's entirely possible that we're going along, we're doing sprints, and then we may finish a sprint and say, you know what? We just want to stop here. I know we said we're going to do 3 more sprints, but the rest of the stuff on the backlog is kind of speculative. We're happy with where we are right now. Okay. Starvation. A project ends by decreasing its budget or suddenly ending funding, also known as withdrawal of life support. So, projects have to fight for resources. And sometimes projects are not bad projects, they just aren't the ones that win. Okay, and so we might stop a project or significantly slow it down or cut its goals just because we find other projects that we love more. So, summary of closing outputs. So this again is a list of the stuff from the PMI methodology. So in project integration management, there's a process called close the project or phase. So what are the outputs from it? Project document updates, final product, service or result, transition, final report, organizational process assets. That's the artifacts that we throw off from all the things that we're doing in the project. And then updates. Oh, organizational process assets updates. I think I would have done the typography a little different there. Um, so let's talk about the outputs of closing. So project documents updates. All project documents should be reviewed and marked as final versions, and the lessons learned register should include lessons learned during the closing process. Uh, the final product, service, or result at transition. Project sponsors are usually the most interested in making sure that the final products, services, or results are delivered and transitioned to the appropriate part of the organization. A final project report and presentation are commonly created during a project closing. Uh, Updates to organizational process assets. Again, those are the artifacts that the organization throws off when it's doing projects and stuff. Okay, so we just want to make sure that we tidy them all up. Okay, including, for instance, putting a lessons learned in a lessons learned repository. Um, a final report. Okay, so we could write a final report. It's a good idea. What could be in it? A summary level, a description of the project or phase, scope objectives, quality objectives, and how we did against them. Schedule objectives, how we did against that. Cost objectives, how we did against that. Summary of how the final project, service, or result achieved the benefits. Now, here's a problem in that a lot of the benefits of these projects are expected to be realized over time. So I'm not sure that we can really report on that in a historical sense unless we hold this report open for probably too long. Summary of how the final project, service, or result achieved the business needs identified in the business plan. Same thing there. Summary of any risks or issues encountered on the project and how they were addressed. Okay, that sounds good. So I just want to point out here, just to go back to the slide. We all work in a political environment, right? And so reports that we write in our organizations, are political documents, right? So that has both sort of a positive impact on these kind of reports and a negative one. The positive impact is in a world where people can often forget what you really achieved, it can be helpful to document them. So then you can point people to them in the future. Okay. The downside. Um, it may not be politically appropriate for you to make every point that you'd like to make. Okay. The organization from the top may have a point of view about how this project went. Okay. Uh, this is true in a couple of slides when we talk about lessons learned report. Okay. Maybe some of the lessons we learned are best just kind of filed away in our head or talked about with our colleagues, but are not ready for publication to the organization as a whole because perhaps they implicate some parts of the organization in a way that the organization isn't ready to hear. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that these reports should not be done. I think there's a lot of value from them, but you need to be realistic about what you can and you can't say. All right. That's just the world. Video highlights about lessons learned. This is sort of interesting. You know, one of the biggest surprises in my adult life was when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. And I really did not see that coming, and a lot of the country didn't see that coming. And so the lessons learned from that, I think people took in a pretty sober way. So there are times when people are ready to listen, okay, about what we can learn from something, and perhaps when things have gone real bad, like we've killed a bunch of people, maybe we have an appetite for really soul-searching kind of lessons learned. Okay. So we slide here about the closing of the just-in-time training project. That's one of the examples from the book. I'm going to let you read that. There's an acceptance completion form, kind of same deal. Where are we? Yeah. Um, Here's a table of contents from their project report. I thought this was interesting. I'll leave you to read that. Here's the sample transition plan that they have. I'll leave you to read that. Sample lessons learned report. Again, um, the point is to make all the points that you're allowed to make. Okay? The fact that you're not allowed to make all of them because the organization is not ready to hear all of them should not keep you from making the ones that the organization is ready to hear. More from the lessons learned report. Um, let's see what went wrong here. Everyone seems to agree that it's important to document and share project lessons learned. In a survey of about 1,000 experienced project managers found that although 62% had formal procedures from learning lessons from projects, only 12% adhered closely to them. And I think the problem here is that some of the things that go wrong in projects that we'd like to learn from have to do with human nature, and it's hard to escape human nature. And some of them have to do with ways in which the organization is not willing to change. Uh, End of project post-mortems were infrequently and inadequately performed. This came from the study. Project managers cited the usual problems: lack of time, key people not available, a culture of blame. And as the one interviewee noted, most projects don't have enough budget to support any good closure. So people are ready to move on for good reasons. You know, they think everything went well, and let's not linger on this. People are ready to move on for bad reasons. Things went horribly, so let's move on from this. So again, the reality is that the organization and the project only have so much appetite for this. But you, as a project manager, should exploit all of the appetite that's there, because this is um, fertile ground for doing good work. So here's another lessons learned example from a textbook example. I'm going to leave you to read that. Um, I I have uh, there's a slide here about social media, um, and I think that the takeaway that I get from this, I have a hard time following it actually, but I think the takeaway is you have to be careful what you say on social media or elsewhere about your project and about your colleagues. Um, and certainly, just because you're angry, it's not a good time to share all that when you're angry. Okay, so often discretion is the better part of valor. Um, a good idea is to have a project closeout meeting. At this meeting, like the kickoff, you should invite key project stakeholders. Some people call this a closeout meeting or a post-mortem, since it's normally held after the project has died and been put to rest. The project champion should start off the meeting, and the project manager and her team should review information like the scope, time, and cost, goals and outcome, the success criteria and results in achieving them. Pretty much the same stuff that we said should go in with on a report. Main changes that occurred during the project and how they were addressed, the main lessons learned, a summary of the transition plan. Okay. I think the nice thing here is that having a ceremony to start a project is a good thing, and having a ceremony to finish a project is a good thing. So if the organization and the sponsor or whoever is going to do this with you, if the organization has the energy and the resources for this, it can be a good experience for all. And then, of course, you have to think about knowledge transfer. Um, Employee knowledge or human capital is a key asset. Recall that knowledge management is a process included under the execution process. Knowledge transfer is the process of communicating the knowledge that was developed by one person or in one part of an organization to another person or other parts of the organization. This is when you consider that it's the nature of projects to develop a product or service and then hand them off. Well, what can you hand off? I mean, there's a lot of knowledge that the team has that you could just lose if you didn't try to transfer it. In particular, people would take over products or results produced as part of the project would need to spend time with project team members so they understand what is involved in the detail. And who's going to maintain this thing? If it's an information system, it has to be maintained. But if it's a new product or a new service that has to be maintained too. And the thoughts of the project team about how to do that, I think, could be quite valuable. And they've included an example here from the textbook examples. Uh, so a best practices as given to us by Kent Green on knowledge management. Um, Best or better practices are not adopted, they're adapted. Okay. Jack Welch, who was the famous head of GE, said, you don't have a better or best practice until somebody else is using it. Okay. The learner is important, and making learning easy is critical, or people will recreate good enough. Yeah, so you really have to take it upon yourself to convey this knowledge. Focus on general, broadly applicable practices first, rather than choosing highly specialized practices. Really looking for things with the biggest payback. Do something, see what works, then broaden the scope. Peer assistance is a critical tool to begin and even conclude the process. Uncover success stories, communicate the stories, and assist the learning and adaptation processes. Facilitation is critical to the process, both the role and the capability. So, again, this knowledge management stuff and the knowledge transfer, this isn't just going to happen organically. Okay. Um, it's important for the project manager to look for opportunities to have this go on. I mean, I think you want to exploit organic opportunities, but you want to make sure this gets done. Documentation, video, and audio artifacts are the starting point for discovery and productive conversation. To facilitate the discovery of best practices, leverage communities wherever possible. And again, I think what we're interested in here is as we're wrapping up the project, what can we do to make sure that we squeeze every little bit of knowledge and value out of the project and the project team before it disperses. Now, how might this be different for agile or hybrid project? So just like predictive or waterfall projects, agile and hybrid projects should be closed. Hybrid projects can use any of the project closing processes listed earlier. I certainly agree with that. A strength of the Scrum events, if used on agile projects, is an intentional moment of closure as follows. In the daily Scrum, you can think of these as providing a closure on the day before. Sprint reviews, you can think of them as closure for the sprint, and maybe it's if it's the last sprint on the entire project. Sprint retrospective. This event is similar to a lessons learned, but it only focuses on a particular sprint. When a project ends, teams should hold a final retrospective to focus on all the lessons learned. Teams should still hold a closeout meeting and celebrate. I think that these ceremonial celebrations at the end of the project are really important things to do. Um, it's interesting. To the extent that you can characterize this as a successful project, having a celebration at the end creates a memory for everybody that ensures that they're always going to remember it as a successful project. So it's not very expensive. Pizza party goes a long way. Um, I think in a, excuse me, I think in one of the next couple of slides we talk about kind of uh, trinkets and gifts and trophies. Uh, what the people who market that stuff refer to it as trinkets and trash. But little trinkets and trash go a long way. Um, the whole ceremonial aspect of managing projects, whether agile or waterfall, um, really opportunities to celebrate and remember and thank and recognize and all that kind of stuff. And it's, as a person who's both organized these things and a person who's participated in these things, um, I think you can't do too much in this area. Now, there are times where you come to the end of a project and maybe the prevailing opinion from on high is it wasn't successful. Okay, and maybe we're not going to have a big party in the company. But that doesn't keep you as the PM for taking, the team out for an informal celebration and thank you. You know, even if there are people at the company who thought that the project was a bomb, you appreciate all the effort that you got from these folks, and they ought to know it. Yeah, yes, we're sort of saying here what went right. So they're talking about closing events for talent shows, and they're talking about trinkets and trash and all this kind of stuff. You can't overdo it. I mean, I guess you could overdo it. You could spend too much. It could be too lavish, but um, usually people don't celebrate or thank enough. And here's a cartoon about bad project dreams. I'll leave you to read that on your own. So that's the chapter summary, and that's the end. So, um, one thing that we kind of talked about, I don't think, actually, we talked about it more in the chapter before than this. Um, it's really important to close out every contract that you have. And it really doesn't matter which side you're on, whether you're the buyer or the seller. You want to make sure that any notice that has to be sent to the other side has been sent. Um, Things have been paid for. If you have to provide a list of defects to be corrected, you sent the list of defects. Contracts typically have some kind of length of time that you have to notify the other side that you want them to act on something. Um, there's there's a talk throughout the book and that you may have a procurement uh, management group. Okay. So you may have people, so the people who sign contracts, negotiate contracts, even track the contracts, they may not be you, the project manager. They may be somebody else. But the fact is that you, the project manager, are responsible for making sure this project is closed, uh, even if it's going to be done by somebody over in procurement. So in that way, you're kind of jointly responsible. So you ought to know what the contracts are. You ought to have a copy of them, and you ought to be working with your counterpart if you have one in procurement or contracts to make sure that everything is buttoned up as completely as possible. And having said that, I'm going to say bye. Bye bye.